welcome back to the channel. This is going to be yet another Viking. So I seem to be lately working in groups of threes. Three on the 15th century, three on the Vikings. God help us, what will I come up with next for another 3 lectures? But this time, on Ore's insistence, I would be talking about 2 famous ship burials from the Viking Age, namely the Jokstad and the Oseberg wrecks. They do not really qualify as wrecks. They were not underwater archaeology projects. In fact, the Jokstad ship was never intended to be an archaeological project at all. It was supposed to be a treasure hunting one. However, it didn't work out that way. I believe I have mentioned in one of the previous videos that from point of view of dating, the Oseberg ship is the older of the 2. The Jokstad is around 50 years or more younger than the 2 vessels, but it was the Jokstad ship that was excavated first and the Oseberg second. Both of these vessels are burials of powerful local rulers. I wouldn't call them kings, but certainly powerful magnates, local, because at the time when the vessels were buried, there were no yet centralized kings. Pretty much any powerful warlord would call himself a king if he chose or she chose to do so. There are a number of interesting constructional features. These vessels really entered popular culture. I have already discussed that quite mistakenly. Both of them frequently are referred to as drakars. They have nothing to do with the drakar, except that they are Viking vessels. Because of their repurposing as burial places, certain aspects of the vessels were missing and were changed in order to prepare them for their service on dry land as chambers, essentially. On the Jokstad ship, part of the internal structure does not survive. The original internal structure does not survive exactly because essentially a hut, a burial chamber, was constructed of the mast-step and mast beam of the vessel. So that changed the architectures. We lost some information there. But overall, they do provide us with a very interesting picture in the slightly earlier than the Roskilde period history of the vessels. I would like to speak briefly about what was found on the vessels. The Jokstad vessel was the burial of probably a warlord, by our modern standards quite a young man. For the medieval period, probably considered rather elderly, shall we say. There are a number of features there. As you probably know, the Jokstad ship was buried in a hill that was known as the King's Hill. It was known, it was always suspected that it is man-made. In other words, it is a tell, not a real hill or a bomb. And in the later 19th century, a couple of bad years followed from agricultural point of view. The growing season was not sufficiently long. The farmers suffered from it. So the sons of the farmer on whose land this hill was decided to follow on the tradition that a king is buried there, and therefore, of course, they expected to find golden treasures that can be sold and restitute the family fortunes. As they began digging into the hill, they realized that there is a ship there. Not really golden treasures of any great quantity, although some was present, of course. But gradually, and kudos to these people, we're talking about the 19th century. In 21st century in America, we still have hard time understanding that the significance of a shipwreck is not the golden treasure that you can extract from it by blowing it up the quickest way, but by studying the contents. So much more kudos to these people who in the late 19th century recognized that this is something of national importance, something that is probably of greater European importance. So instead of ripping it to pieces, they invited professional archaeologists who completed the documentation and excavation. Yes, the farming family were compensated by the state for this, but really kudos to them for figuring out how this monument should be treated. The Oseberg ship, in some ways, is similar to this. It was buried sometime early in the 9th century AD, at the height of the Viking menace. However, the difference is that a woman is buried there. She also was of certain age, in her 50s, but with her are buried some servants and a young, much younger lady, who is also of higher status, obviously, probably was a companion, personal attendant of the dead ruler, because the style of clothing in which she is buried is also much higher level than the other servants inside the vessel. Other things that are found inside the vessels include cooking pots, fireplace inside. There are personal properties. There is a sleigh and a cart inside it. There is a sleigh in the Jokstad vessel, incidentally, and quite a few bits and pieces of the rigging and the structure of the vessels. So yes, highly valuable sites, slightly different, but yet similar. For the Oseberg ship, one particularly interesting feature is that the vessel is highly decorated. It is small. It is small enough that it is unlikely to have been capable of ocean crossing or any extensive sailing. So the current archaeological interpretation of the site is that we're talking about a pleasure boat, essentially a status symbol vessel that was used to sail around and control the local fjords, the area in which this lady dominated. But it was not intended to be a warship. It was not intended for long voyages, whether it is of colonization, exploration, or pure piracy on the high seas. That it was not. It is very highly decorated vessel. In fact, it's probably the only Viking ship so far found that is so heavily carved. Even the seams along the planks where the roofs are entered, even they have beading carved into the edges of the planking. No, this vessel does not have any dragon heads or anything similar. Disappointing as this may sound, none were found in either of the two wrecks. Well, burials really, not wrecks per se. This, of course, attracts the other feature that I would like to mention. We have this idea that Viking rulers were buried in their ships with fire, that the body is put inside the vessel, the ship is cast off into the sea, and then archers on dry land start firing lighted arrows at it. Thank you, Kirk Douglas, for this, since it really comes from the movie The Vikings, starring the great late Kirk Douglas. This has left popular image that is repeated by other movies in more recent times, but as a matter of fact, we do not have archaeological evidence for this happening. We do have archaeological evidence for Thailand ship burials, but even they are few and far between, and certainly by the end of the 10th century, the beginning of the 11th century, this does not appear to be the case anymore. But even before that, it would have been extremely rare occurrence. Speaking of the construction of these vessels, and here I would like to bring your attention to an interesting detail that is common between both the Jokstad and the Oseberg ship, but we no longer see it in the later Skuldelev wrecks. And that is the cleats on the planking. The frames are not nailed, they're not bolted, they're not even thrown out. Here is a copy of a printout, actually, of the freely available as a PDF publication on the Jokstad ship. In a previous video, I think that I mentioned that it is freely available online. You can find it. But the interesting part, the one that I really wanted to show you, is actually this drawing over here. It is on plate 4 of the illustrations. It is showing the planking over here as you would expect it, clinker, overlapping planking. But look at these cleats that are protruding from the middle of the planking. Through them, a hole is drilled and lashings are used to hold the frame to the planking. They're not nailed, they're not bolted, they're not even thrown out. They're all lashed. Undoubtedly, this is a very flexible, easily repaired way of construction. On the negative side, it is damnably expensive. They could afford it because there still were plentiful oak forests that were easily accessible for split timbers. That is one of the defects of these vessels. They actually require very high quality oak timber because all the planks are naturally split. They are not sawn. They're split into quarters. And in order to produce the proper size of plank, you have to start with a very large timber growing. And if you're going to carve cleats on the face, if the cleat is 2 inches protruding, this in essence means that you have to, and the plank is, let's say, 1.5 inches or 2 inches thick itself. I think it is less than this, but it doesn't matter. I'm doing it for illustrative purposes. You essentially are starting with double the thickness that you have to dub down to the proper thickness of the timber. All of this is complete waste of high quality, expensive timber. So that probably is why cleats were phased out of the construction of these vessels. Needless to say, I have yet to see a kit that shows properly the attachment of the frames to the planking on these 2 vessels, specifically on the Oseberg, because most of the kits that I'm aware, in fact, I can't think of a kit of the Vikings-Age ship off the top of my head, but plentiful of the Oseberg vessel. Of course, most of these are following the old lines of the vessel, but early in the 2000s, Vibeke Bischoff, a scholar from the Roskilde Museum, discovered as a result of a tragedy that happened to one of the Oseberg wrecks, in this case, Rio wreck. It was a replica of the Oseberg ship, or at least was intended to be a replica of the Oseberg ship, and managed successfully to drown half of its crew by squatting the stern down and sinking. Not what you would expect from a Viking ship. So the people who were involved with the project recognized that the problem is unlikely to be with the original vessel, which clearly was not new at the time of the burial, and therefore had been used at sea, and clearly did not sink. Therefore, ergo, the problem must be with a modern replica. In other words, there is something that we in the 21st century did not understand about the construction of the Oseberg ship. Enters the picture the scholar Vibeke Bischoff. She analyzed the vessel, she re-recorded it, and came to the conclusion that when the ship was assembled in the museum in the beginning of the 20th century, they had made a mistake in one of the frames. So as recorded and as standing in the museum, the stern of the vessel was too narrow, and that is why it didn't have enough buoyancy. She undertook a very detailed study that she reported at the ISBSA, the International Symposium for Boat and Ship Archaeology, in 2009, and in the last few years actually defended a doctoral dissertation on the same subject. Congratulations, Vibeke. And in that book, she does present, in her dissertation, she presents the corrected lines of the stern. Be this as it may, here is a challenge for the next kit manufacturer who comes up with the idea of creating yet another Oseberg. Try to do it accurately, try to do it with cleats on the planking. Good luck. And with this, ladies and gentlemen, I bid you fond farewell, and until next time.